Tonight's shiur topic is what must we fear most? Part 2, continuation of last week's shiur, which is based on Parashat Eikev and the pasuk that says, "Va'ata Yisrael." Now, O Israel, Ma Hashem Elokecha shoel me'imach. What is it that the Lord your God asks of you? Ki im li'ira et Hashem Elokecha, but to fear the Lord your God. Lalechet bechol derachav, to go in all of his ways, ula'ava oto, and to love him, ve'la'avod et Hashem Elokecha, and to serve the Lord your God, bechol levavecha uvechol nafshecha, with all of your heart and with all of your soul. And we mentioned that when one has fear, a true fear of God, one transcends oneself. This is the basic component of last week's shiur, and we will now continue based upon that, but it could be a totally independent shiur. So the verse says, what is it that God asks of you? Just to fear him. Just to fear him. Ma Hashem shoel me'imach. What does God ask of you? Ki im li'ira et Hashem Elokecha. Just to fear the Lord your God. Why is it that this verse asks us, in the first instance, to fear the Lord your God? And then later on it says, it's almost like a prerequisite. Then you will walk in his ways, and you will love him, and you will serve him with all of your heart and with all of your soul. Why is it not that God asks us, what is it that God asks of us, just but to love him? To love him. Is loving God such an insignificant thing? It's very powerful. It's a very great motivation. To serve God with love is an unbelievable thing. Can you imagine what motivation, what sincerity, what passion a person, when he puts on tefillin out of a sense of love for God, when a person prays out of a sense of love for God, is very powerful. So we discussed last week the difference between love and the difference between awe and fear. Love, the subject matter is me. I want to come close to God. I love God. I want to cleave to him. I want to follow in his ways. And awe of God is to transcend oneself totally, that one doesn't think about oneself, one only thinks about God himself because of the great amount of respect that we have for him. So the subject matter is God, not me. But still, why does not the verse say, what is it that God asks of you? Just to love him. There's an interesting Gemara that the sages say. Amar Rabbi Hanina b'shem Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Hanina says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, En lo la'kadosh baruch hu bebet genazav. Hashem, the only thing that he has in his hidden treasures, ela otzar shel yirat shamayim. What is it that God has in his treasure house? What is it that God treasures the most? That he keeps in his treasure house, so to speak. What do you keep in your treasure house? You don't keep the fruits. You don't keep the bananas. You keep the most precious things. Even, the fashion jewelry and you don't keep it in your vault, in your safe. You keep it you keep it out. What do you keep in the safe? You keep your most precious things there, something that is most precious to you. Even if it's not valuable, if it has sentimental value, for example, to you, it's precious to you, it has memories or whatever, you keep it in a very safe place. So too, the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says, Rabbi Hanina says in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, what is it that God treasures most? What is it that he has in his treasure house? The fear of God. That's it. That's what God treasures most. Why not love? Why is it that fear of God is so unique? And as we mentioned last week, the biggest compliment that you can give a Jew is that he's God-fearing. Oh, he's a God-fearing Jew. Shene'emar, as it says, he continues and he quotes a pasuk in Yeshayahu, chapter 33, verse 6. Yirat Hashem hi otzaro. The fear of God is his treasure. Where Yeshayahu says clearly, what is God's treasure? The fear of God. Then there's another interesting Gemara that everybody should be very familiar with. The Gemara says, Hakol bidei shamayim, chutz mi yirat shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven. Everything is guided by heaven. We get heavenly assistance. Everything in this world is guided by heaven. Chutz mi yirat shamayim, except for the fear of heaven. The fear of heaven is the only thing that is totally dependent upon us. Why? I can understand to be wealthy, to be healthy, the length of days, the length of years. I understand that that's in the hands of God. I understand that God has a destiny for us, where we should go, where we should live, who we interact with, who we marry, who our children will be, who our parents are, who our brothers and sisters are, all dependent upon God. Whether we are wise, whether we are not so wise, is something that is totally destined for us, predestined. The Almighty decides. That I understand. But the fact that it says the only thing that is dependent upon us, the only thing that is not divinely guided or we get divine assistance from, is the fear of heaven. What about the love of heaven? The love of heaven, is that guided by God? Surely everything spiritual is our free choice, is dependent upon us, and not dependent upon heaven. So why do the sages make a point to expressly say everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven? Why don't they say everything is in the hands of heaven except for the love of God, the fear of God? Again, is love of God not so important? And as we said before, why is the love of God not mentioned, as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is saying, that in God's treasure house there is love of God and fear of God? Why only the fear of God? Why does Yeshayahu say, Yirat Hashem otzaro, the fear of God is his treasure? Why not the love of God? So here we have another indication where fear, where the respect or the awe of God takes again preeminence. Now, even though that we charted out last week that the highest level of fear of God is higher than the higher level of love of God, but still, nonetheless, the high level of love of God and even the lower level of love of God is an achievement, is a great thing. Surely that also should be part of God's treasure house. Surely that is also something that is within man's free choice and ability to achieve and doesn't come from heaven. That's part of the free choice. You want to love God? It's up to you. It says in this week's parasha, "Lalechet bechol derachav." In this pasuk, to go in all of his ways. And there are other verses that says that to cleave to him and to go in all of his ways. The sages asked, is it possible to cleave to God? Can we actually cleave to God? Can we walk in his ways? Can you walk in God's ways? God is infinite. How can you walk in God's ways? What is the intention to walk in God's ways? The intention is to go after his attributes. We cannot walk in God's ways. We are not infinite. God is infinite. But we can emulate his attributes that he expresses. His love for the people, for the world. His mercy, his kindness. For example, the sages say, Mahu malbish harumim. Just as he clothes the needy, the naked, so too must we emulate him and take care of the needy. Ma'u hanun verahum. Afataya hanun verahum. Just as he is merciful and he is gracious, so to you must be gracious and merciful. Just as he visited the sick, for example, Avraham Avinu, so too you must emulate him and visit the sick. Just as he is kind and does acts of kindness, so too you must do acts of kindness. You can emulate his ways, you can go in his ways. And this is something that every single one of us can in fact achieve. Lo b'shamayim hi. It's not like Moshe Rabbeinu says, it's not in the heavens. V'lo me'ever layam. And it's not across vast seas. Ki karov elecha davar me'od. The matter is very close to you. Beficha u'bilvavecha. In your mouth and in your heart. La'asoto, to do it, to achieve it. It's not in the heavens. To serve God is not in the heavens. Why not? Isn't it a challenge? To walk in the ways of God, to emulate the ways of God, it's a challenge. But it's not in the heavens. You know why? Because we are created in the image of God. And we have a helek elokah mimal. We have a portion of God within us. This is the image that we are created. We have a soul, and the soul is indivisible. The soul is a part of God himself. And therefore, if God is merciful, we have that spark as well. We have that image within ourselves. If God is gracious, well, we are created in the image. We have the capacity to feel merciful for another being. God visits the sick, God clothes the needy. We have the capacity to go beyond ourselves and not only care for ourselves or our family, our children, our loved ones, but to care for the stranger as well. Why? Because we are created in the image of God. And because we are created in the image of God, we have that potential. We have that ability. We have that ability. Therefore, it should not come as a surprise or a shock to us that we're able to express love, brotherhood, friendship, and all of the acts of kindness and all of the mitzvot, because we are akin to God. We are created in the image and in his likeness. And when it says in his image and in his likeness, does not just mean free choice. It means we have a part of God within us. And just as God is merciful, we have the capacity to be merciful. Just don't let the body and the evil inclination and the animalistic side of us make a blockage and conceal that purity of heart that we have. The soul is so pure. But we conceal it. And then we begin to develop selfishness and jealousy and greed. And we forget about the soul. And we don't allow the soul to express itself. But intrinsically, the soul is pure. But there is one attribute that we cannot emulate. And that is fear. Because God has nothing to fear. God can be merciful. God can be kind. God can be gracious. Because he created beings, so to speak, to expose and give of his love, his compassion, his bounty. But God has nothing and no one to fear. So therefore, when we are created in the image of God, we can express love. Love is a natural feeling that we have within us. To be able to love God should come natural to every single one of us. Comes natural. Fear does not come natural. Why doesn't it come natural? Because God has no one and nothing to fear. God created everything. God is unlimited. Everything is totally dependent upon God. God has nothing to fear, no one to fear. Nothing exists outside of his realm. Everything is totally dependent upon him. And therefore fear is something totally different than love. Fear is something that we actually can only develop by ourselves without any divine assistance. There's no divine assistance here. Love, there is divine assistance because it comes natural to us. Because God loves. The very act of creation is an act of kindness. The continuity of the world is an act of love, a continual act of God's love and grace and kindness. It's only natural that we emulate that. It's only natural that we have an inborn and inbred love towards God. And therefore God doesn't demand that of us like He demands awe and fear. Of course we have to serve God with all of our heart, etc. And it says that in the Shema. It says that in many, many places. But why the unique expression of Ma Hashem shoel mi'imach? What is it that God asks of you? Only to fear Him. That expression is only reserved for fear. Sure, God demands that we love Him. Sure, God demands that we be kind and gracious. But not in that same manner of fear. Because that manner of expression, Ma Hashem shoel mi'imach, what is it God asks of you because only you can give it. Love and fear, that comes from divine assistance. There is love and kindness and all of that stuff that comes from, there's divine assistance here. Why? Because we are created in the image of God. It is easy for us to emulate this, but we cannot emulate fear because God has no fear. We have to develop within ourselves, and that takes meditation. That takes contemplation. That takes such an appreciation of the greatness of God, to the extent that we transcend ourselves. So when it says, what is it that God asks of you? Only to fear Him. Yes, only to fear Him. That He truly asks of you. The rest He doesn't really ask of you because it's part and parcel of going in His ways, which we can all follow in His ways. But the true request, what is it that God really truly asks of you? What is it that only you can give? That is fear. There's no divine assistance for fear because it's not in the image of God. There is no fear in God that we can replicate, that we can find within ourselves a small, minute, a spark of fear within that image of God. There is no fear. God fears no one and nothing. So me'imach, from you. It comes from you, truly, truly from you. The greatest gift that you can give is not so much love. Because love, you have it within you. It's part of your DNA. God loves, you love. It's within your DNA. But to truly fear and to fear God, not to fear in a selfish manner as we discussed last week. To transcend yourself, that is the greatest gift that we can give. And this is why it says that Yirat Hashem hi otzaro, that the fear of God is the greatest treasure. This is why Rabbi Hanina said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, En lo lakadosh baruch hu bebet genazav ela otzar shel yirat shamayim. What is it that God has, so to speak, stored in His treasure house? Only the fear of God. Because that is the greatest gift that we can give. And to give the higher level of fear, that is to transcend oneself. Even the higher level of love that we discussed last week, the unselfish love, is not transcending oneself because you have it within you. You're not transcending. You're just finding something within you. You are removing all of the concealments. You are removing all of the negativity, you are removing all the selfishness, you are removing the bodily desires, you are removing the influence of the evil inclination and the animalistic soul, and you are revealing what really you have within you to reveal. Because the soul is so pure and so precious and so sublime. But the fear of God, the awe of God, the respect of God, this is something that you have to work within yourself. And there, you don't get the same measure or level of assistance that you get for love or that you get for emulating the ways of God, because you're on your own.
But can I say something? You say there's no real divine assistance or no level of assistance to fear, right? But then, you've got the Ten Commandments and all the 613 laws that sort of guide you. they're sort of telling you to fear this, fear that, fear. So, I mean, isn't that a form of assistance in a way? You know what I'm saying?
The commandments,
Yeah. And the 613 laws that you have to follow.
the commandments
Yeah.
don't automatically embed the fear and the respect of God within us. It is something that is, like Maimonides says. Maimonides says where, for example, one of the commandments to love God.
Yeah.
And he asks, how can you command an emotion? You can't command an emotion. I can't command you to love me. But what I can command you, Maimonides explains, is I can command you to meditate and contemplate on the greatness of God and how His goodness is so great. By thinking about that and pondering about that, that will arouse that emotion. Similarly with the awe. A person can do a mitzvah, a commandment, mechanically, without any awe, without any feeling, right? Can do it mechanically. True, to a certain degree, the mitzvot mold us, make us into better people. There's no doubt about that, right? But ultimately, we must spend time to arouse and cultivate the awe and the fear of God. And what I'm trying to say is that love is very different from the fear of God, because love, we have it within us. The only problem is because we are human beings and we have a body, we tend to express the love and the passion towards physical things. We have a passion for physical things. It's rare that we show a passion for spiritual things, but we do have it from time to time. The way to do that is cut through the facade, cut through the impurity of the world. Fear is totally different. Fear, you don't have it within your spiritual DNA. You must actually totally cultivate it. And the way to cultivate it is to meditate and to think about the awesomeness of God, and slowly nullify ourselves totally before God. So by putting on tefillin, I'm not going to get the awe of God immediately. I have to cultivate it. I have to think about it. By putting on tefillin may make me more, like the commentaries say, the mitzvot, one of the reasons, the ultimate reason of the mitzvah, there's a debate whether we can really analyze the reasons of the mitzvot. What is the reason of the mitzvot? And some say simply the mitzvot, no matter what they are, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's tefillin, whether it's this, whether it's that, the mitzvot are ultimately a test of our obedience to God. We owe our obedience to God. He is the creator, and we are His subjects. And we receive the divine bounty from God continually. It behooves us to be able to give ourselves over to God, to commit ourselves to God. So the mitzvot, yes, are an expression of our observance. But is it a fear, an awe, and a respect of God that we spoke about last week to transcend oneself? That you have to cultivate, that you have to work on, to the extent that it obviously is not a natural outcome of the mitzvot. In fact, the other way around, if you have a look at the way the verse is worded, it works like this. V'ata Yisrael, now, O Israel, ma Hashem Elokecha shoel mimach, what is it that God asks of you? Ki im liyiraot et Hashem Elokecha, to fear the Lord your God. Now look what it says afterwards, and that's what I mentioned last week. It seems that the rest is a natural outcome, an outgrowth of fear of God. When you have the fear and the respect and the awe of God, what comes next? Lalechet bechol derachav, to go in all of His ways. Ula'ava oto, and you will come to love Him automatically. V'la'avot et Hashem Elokecha bechol levavcha v'chol nafshecha, to serve the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul. So to me it seems that this verse indicates that if you really have fear of God, you have everything. You have everything. And it's not a natural outcome. It's not a natural outgrowth. I think that if you do particular mitzvot, like the Sefer HaChinuch says, one of the books that enumerate the commandments, he writes that the mitzvot, each mitzvah defines who we are, makes us into a better being, makes us into more charitable, more kind, and more obedient to God, more spiritually sensitive even. But to say that automatically, by putting on tefillin or other mitzvah, automatically you get the awe of God, well then why did God seek that of us? Why does it say, what is it that God asks of you already? So it's something that we have to cultivate. To such an extent that we have to cultivate, as I mentioned before, Ma Hashem Elokecha shoel me'imach, from you. And from you is very significant here because from you, it's only from you. And that's why the sages say, Hakol bidei shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven, even spiritual matters to a certain degree. We have free choice, but even spiritual matters are somewhat in the hands of heaven because we get divine assistance. Chutz miyirat shamayim, except for the fear of God. Because the fear of God is the only thing that you don't get that divine assistance. It's not part of your spiritual DNA. It is something that you must cultivate. Now, even though Maimonides says that in regards to loving the Lord your God, as it says you shall love the Lord your God, how can God command us to love Him? You can't command an emotion. Right? You can't demand an emotion. Love me. You go to someone and tell him, I demand that you love me. Can't demand that. But you can say, I would like of you to go and ponder and think and meditate. And when you ponder and think and meditate, automatically, then you will come to love God. But the loving of God is not such a difficult thing because we have it within us. Because we are created in the image of God and we have it within us. The awe of God is a bit more independent. It is less, it is, as the Hachamim say, Hakol bidei shamayim, everything is in the hands of heaven, chutz miyirat shamayim, except for the awe of God, the fear of God. Then there's another very important question that we need to ask. The way the verse is worded is, what is it that God asks of you? It's almost like saying, like we always tell our children, what have I asked of you already? When you were born, we took care of you, we woke up, we fed you, we bathed you, sometimes I tell my kids, I cleaned your bottom. Change your nappies. We work hard to support you. We sat with you nights when you weren't feeling well. In fact, I have to pick up my son to go to the medical center. You know what a pain in the neck it is to go to the medical center? I'll pay someone to go to the medical center. I don't want to go to the medical center. What a pain to sit in the medical center. We do so much. So occasionally we tell that kid, what did I ask of you already? What did I ask you? Take out the garbage? That's all I ask of you. Or be decent in school. What do we ask of you already? Did I ask you to pay your school fees? Did I ask you to pay your shoes and your this and your clothes? What did I ask of you? Just go to school, be decent, be normal. You don't even have to be outstanding. Just be decent. Listen, do your homework. That's it. What do we ask of you already? So the expression of, and the sages ask this, Ma Hashem shoel me'imach, what is it that He asks of you already? Seems to indicate that, it's not such a big thing. And the Gemara asks, Atu yira milta zutra tahi. This yira, this fear, is it a small matter? Is it a small thing? How many people who are scholars, how many people who learned years don't necessarily have a great fear and respect of God? It takes an immense amount of effort to cultivate that fear and that respect and that awe of God. What do you think? You sit, you study Torah, you automatically have it? You don't have it. You've got to work hard on it.
Touched about children, that when you have a relationship with your parents, and often you have all your parents, without, just because of the relationship. We always compare our relationship with God to children with the Father. And over there, you didn't have to cultivate any awe to your parents. It just came almost naturally through the relationship.
Not true. It says explicitly in the Torah. It said explicitly in the Torah that you have to fear your parents. You have to.
But you don't work on it. It just comes naturally.
You do. You do have to work on it. How many kids are chutzpan?
No, that's what I said. Through the relationship with your parents, if they are proper, from them, that they create that thing in to them, then you have it. It doesn't come from you.
Yeah, but you can't command You can't command.
You can't command it, you create it, through the relationship. And maybe
I don't think so. And you know what? There's not that much evidence. I know what you're trying. I know what you're saying. That there is some sort of umbilical cord that always attaches us to our parents. I agree with that. And that's what I said before. Look, there's always that inbred feelings that we have to Hashem. Absolutely. But the awe that we are talking about, the awe, the respect, the hitbatlut, the total nullifying oneself before God, the transcendence that we talked about last week, that's something that takes that needs to be developed. To transcend oneself, to totally transcend oneself. You see, even as we spoke about last week, love, to love God, even the highest form of love, ahava ilah, is yesh mi she'ohev, the Kabbalists say. There is someone who loves. In other words, there is some element of self, of oneself. Right? So even the relationship between the father and the son, the son and the father, the son and the parents, there is the me and then there is the you, and I want to be decent, I want to do the right thing, or whatever the case may be. But the awe is to totally transcend. To totally transcend oneself is not something that is automatic.
no, but you see a lot of times, even when you have children who have very bad relations with their parents, they still have awe of them. Often you see that. Like when push comes to shove, even I'm not saying everybody, but it's like as if it's inside you. It's not like when you say that you have to have assistance. I mean, somehow I feel that Hashem must have embedded that in us for us to be able to achieve it. Otherwise, how do you create something from nothing?
There is no doubt that if God commanded it, there's a potential, absolutely. But it's a potential that lies within ourselves rather than that we can come to through recognition, through pondering.
That means we have to have a relationship like a father and son, in a way, between us and God.
Well, the fact that Hashem is a given. We have to be able to recognize that. The more we ponder, the more we recognize, the more hitbatlut, the more nullification we have before God. The question is to what level this awe that you're talking about, or this, respect, or perhaps distance, or boundaries, perhaps knowing one's boundaries or limitations, like you say, push come to shove, is not the awe that we're talking about here. The awe that we're talking about is hitbatlut, bitul metziut, that you don't exist anymore, that is total transcending oneself. No, it's not easy at all. So that's what we're asking now. So the Gemara asks, the expression of the verse, it's almost like, what is it that I ask of you already? Not such a big deal. Like we say to our kids, what is it that I'm asking of you already? Not such a big deal, not the end of the world. What do you mean, not the end of the world? Did the Hachamim not say in another place, that what is it that God has in His treasure house? Only the fear of God. It's very precious. Everything is in the hands of heaven except the fear of heaven, which means to say that it's something that is very difficult. You know what the Gemara answers? Yes, for Moshe Rabbeinu. For Moshe Rabbeinu. What an answer. What an answer. What kind of answer is that? For Moshe Rabbeinu, fear is a small matter. It's a small thing. It's something that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to achieve easily. How does that solve my problem? How does that answer the question for me? Okay, for Moshe Rabbeinu, someone who has a soul like Moshe Rabbeinu, someone who studied Torah like Moshe Rabbeinu, for him, the fear of God is an easy matter to achieve. But for me, and when God says, when God phrases this verse, who's he addressing? Moshe Rabbeinu? He doesn't address Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, Ve'ata Yisrael. Now you, O Israel. Ma Hashem shoel me'imach. What is it he's asking of you? Of you. So what type of answer is the Gemara giving me that, for Moshe Rabbeinu? That doesn't answer my question. I saw a beautiful answer. One of the earliest Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, the Holy Baal Shem Tov, the Baal HaToldot, he wrote a book. And he writes a very beautiful answer. But before I get to his answer, the Maggid of Dubna, which was a Talmid of the Vilna Gaon, gives a very interesting and beautiful answer. And he says that, sometimes when you have barrels, when you have like a big barrel and then you have like little barrels underneath it, around it, when you fill up the big barrel and it overflows automatically into the smaller barrels around it. So too, Moshe Rabbeinu had so much fear of God, awe of God, respect of God, that he overflowed with it. And when he overflowed with it, it automatically, he imbued all of these generation, all of the people around him. He was able to infect them and affect them with his fear of God, with his respect of God, with his awe of God. Just bubbled over. It was there in abundance. So the Gemara says, the fact, according to the Maggid of Dubna, Rabbi Yaakov Krantz was his name. According to him, yes, it's an easy matter. It's an easy matter for Moshe Rabbeinu, and it's an easy matter. If it was easy matter for Moshe Rabbeinu, it was easy for his followers, for his disciples. But that is all good and fine in the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu. Those who live with Moshe Rabbeinu. I can understand Moshe Rabbeinu influence all around him. He was so full of wine that it just overflowed, so full of this awe of God that it overflowed. But what about this generation? What about all the other generations that did have Moshe Rabbeinu? So one way to look at it is, it pashtuta de Moshe b'chol dara v'dara. In every generation, there is the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the tzaddikim of the generation have a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu, and one has to attach oneself to the righteous, to the scholars, to the tzaddikim. When one attaches oneself to the tzaddikim, automatically their level that they have achieved bubbles and overflows over and impacts us and arouses us as well. I spent many years by the Rebbe in New York, and I can tell you that whenever I was in his presence, his aura, his presence, his influence impacted me greatly. In the awe of God, and the fear of God, and the love of God, and the service of God. But I will say something, that although, like you were saying before, that parents have a certain influence, and push come to shove, the child will always have some sort of sentiment to the parent. You can say the same thing about a tzaddik, that a righteous man, that the righteous man automatically has some sort of effect on you. But I can tell you one thing, that whenever I prepared myself for an encounter with the Rebbe, for example, let's say it was my birthday, for example, or I had an issue, or someone asked me to ask for a blessing from the Rebbe, and I knew in advance that I'm going before the Rebbe. So when you go before a righteous man, you prepare yourself. You go to the mikvah, you study beforehand, you read Tehillim, and you mentally prepare yourself, you meditate. Whenever I did that, the level of awe and respect and love and fear that I felt towards the tzaddik, towards the righteous Rebbe, was, how should I say, was incomparable to the awe, the respect that I felt were I not to prepare myself. So when I meditated, the awe was much more superior and longer lasting. Longer lasting means to say, it impacted me and affected me for much longer, for days, weeks, sometimes more, sometimes years, or certain incidents. Till today, I think about it, I get very emotional. And I get either goosebumps, or I feel teary, or I feel very, very emotional. And a lot of that was dependent upon the preparation. So yes, the sages and the scholars and the tzaddikim of generation absolutely affect us. The more we invest in it, what is it God asks of you? The more we invest from ourselves, the more dividends there are. The more we feel, the more it impacts us, the more it changes our lives, the more meaningful it is for us. So yes, like Ezra was saying before, yes, mitzvot absolutely assist us and absolutely make a difference to us and change us. But when we invest, when we ponder, and when we meditate, and when we contemplate about the greatness of God, and we spend time on it, then it affects us and changes our lives. So one answer to the Maggid of Dubna is that when you attach yourself to the tzaddikim of the generation, the righteous of the generation, then their fear overflows. And even though the fear and the awe of God is a very mighty level to achieve, it becomes easier when we attach ourselves, when we choose to attach ourselves and nullify ourselves to the tzaddikim, and by nullifying ourselves to the righteous, we get uplifted together with them. We feel a certain degree of their awe, of their sanctity, of their purity. That's one answer. But another interesting answer I saw from the Baal HaToldot is as follows, a wondrous thing. What was the attribute that defined Moshe Rabbeinu? Out of all of the attributes, all the qualities, what was the greatest quality, what was the greatest compliment that the Torah gives Moshe Rabbeinu? What? Anava. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humblest of person upon all the face of the earth. The most humblest of man. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humblest. That is the greatest compliment that the Torah calls him. Therefore, if the Gemara tells us that is fear of God such a easy thing to acquire, and the Gemara says yes for Moshe Rabbeinu, it doesn't mean exclusively for Moshe Rabbeinu. It means for anybody who emulates the attribute that Moshe Rabbeinu was most famous for. And what was that? Humility. And what is humility? What is humility? To transcend self. And if you're able to transcend yourself, that's exact level attribute of what we discussed last week of what fear really is, to transcend oneself. Higher than even loving God. Because although loving God is a certain level of transcendence, but there is still a level of self. There's still a level of self there, that I love God. That I want to cleave and attach myself to God. That I want to go in His ways. I want to cleave in His ways. I want to emulate His ways. But to fear God is to totally transcend oneself. To be humble is to transcend oneself. It's to transcend oneself. Therefore, if we are able to emulate the Moshe Rabbeinu, the attribute of Moshe Rabbeinu, the more we are able to emulate the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu, the more easy it becomes for us to fear God.
What comes first? The humbleness creates awe, and the awe creates humbleness.
It seems from the Gemara that the Gemara asks, is fear such a small matter? In other words, awe is a very, very difficult thing. It is very precious, as we mentioned before from the previous quotes of the sages. It is a very precious thing. Yirat Hashem hi otzaro, the fear of God is his treasure. So obviously if it's his treasure, it's the most precious thing in the world. You know, what is it? I was just driving on the radio, and they was telling me something about there was something that they have in France a lot. Truffles. Is that what it's called? Truffles. It's like $2,000 a kilo, or the saffron, the real saffron. You know, they sell it like little strands. It costs like it's probably the most expensive item in the world. No,
Yeah.
no, more than gold.
Not as much.
By weight for sure, more than gold. By weight, it's more than gold.
No, I don't think it's cost 50,000.
How much? The genuine saffron. They sell a little bit the genuine for $500,000, just a few strands. You take a kilo of that. How much is a kilo of gold, Moshe?
50,000.
How much?
About 50,000.
50,000. Now, I can tell you that just a little few strands of saffron, the real saffron, it's strand, I saw it. It's expensive. So, Yirat Hashem Yotzaro, what do you keep? What is so precious? Something that even little amounts is precious. A little amount of fear of God is precious in the eyes of God. So the fact that the Gemara asks, is it a small matter? And the Gemara answers, yes, it's a small matter for Moshe Rabbeinu, means to say that ordinarily it's not. It's not a small matter. Yes, of course, you can achieve it, but it's hard work. But if you emulate the way of Moshe Rabbeinu, i.e. humility, you work on humbling yourself, then the fear of God becomes a much more easier exercise, a much more easier attribute that we can achieve. Indeed, I think, Moshe, the answer to that question is, I think that it's easier to work on the humility, to humble ourselves, than to work on the true fear of God. The more we humble ourselves, the more we're able to achieve true fear of God.
So if you have assistance in that, then you have assistance in getting off.
A point?
Getting what? Up.
Or what he's saying is that maybe we're getting in the back way. Maybe we're getting in the back door. Maybe that's the shortcut. Maybe that's what the Gemara is telling us. Yes, it's very difficult. But you want a shortcut? You want to make it easy? Get through the back door. And then maybe you do have that divine assistance because God is humble. God humbles himself. The same place, so to speak, the same attributes where you see God's greatness, you see his humility. You see how God descends down and cares about every ant, every one of us, and every aspect of us. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe the answer is that's how we get through the back door. The point is we see the correlation between the two. That's really what I wanted to bring out. What type of answer is this when the Gemara says, the fear of God is an easy thing? And the Gemara answers, yes, for Moshe Rabbeinu, it is an easy thing. There is a correlation between the attribute of Moshe Rabbeinu that he was so famous for, and that was the humility. Because to be humble is also the same attribute as to fear God, to transcend oneself. To transcend oneself means to say that there is room for someone else. You don't always seek for yourself, for your own benefit. You're not worried about yourself all of the time. You're not always complimenting yourself and all of that type of things. You need to transcend yourself to a certain degree to be humble, not to think about yourself all of the time. The more you do that, the more then you really, perhaps even automatically, achieve the level of awe, which is also a level of transcendence. Maybe it's like an automatic byproduct that can come about. So we'll stop here.